Yeah, well, so we made a short video before the movie's release. This highly anticipated movie, this multi-million dollar production, globally awaited. Everyone is watching this movie. The movie's actually good. I like the movie a lot. Yeah, I confess, I went to see the movie with somewhat low expectations because there were so many people speaking ill of the movie, saying the movie was a major distortion of the work, and my expectations weren't that high. But the movie is good. The movie is good. Yeah, I've never seen a movie that could ever truly surpass the original book it was based on. So I've never actually read Harry Potter, for example, but dedicated Harry Potter fans often say that the movies simply don't even come close to capturing what the book was. Yeah, I've never read The Lord of the Rings either, but Lord of the Rings fans say the movie doesn't even come close to what the book is. And of course, Nolan's Odyssey doesn't quite measure up to the depth of the book. As expected, cinema has limitations. Cinema has to make a marketable movie. If he put everything from the book into the movie, maybe no one would watch the movie. Maybe it would get boring. So there's poetic license. There are certain adaptations that are expected within a cinematographic work. And what we are planning to do today is take a closer look and compare what's in the movie with what's in the book, or what appears in one version but is missing from the other. Not with the goal of, oh, how he distorted the work. If I were making the movie, I'd be making a much better movie. That's not at all what I'm trying to do. I wanted you to see this movie much more as a first step in the study of the Odyssey, that you feel invited to study this magnificent work, this pair of works that is the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are the great foundation of Greek culture and the great foundation of Western culture. So, the goal here is to explain a bit of the symbolism that, due to some omissions in the movie, couldn't be so clear. And if we don't see a class like this, we might miss some things. Yeah, first, for us, to be able to understand this work, both works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and not only that, all Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy, all the philosophy of the Cynics, the Skeptics, the Stoics, which you like very much, there are some ideas that have to be clear. The first one, from the point of view of Greek philosophy, within the human being, there are multiple parts. You have within you a vegetative part, plant-like, an animal part, a human part, and a divine part. You have these four parts. In all human beings, you will find these four parts: a vegetative part, an animal part, often called concupiscent, a human part, and a divine part. Yeah, the big question we have to ask is, who governs us? Who governs you? Who governs me most of the time? So if we could do a big brother on anyone's life, the greatest man on earth, and when I say greatest, cut those people out, like Jesus, Buddha, those people don't count, okay? No, they're not part of our game. Normal men, but the greatest of all normal men, if you did a big brother of his life, you would see that there would be moments in his life when he would act like an animal. If you take and do a big brother of the worst man on the planet, you'll see that there will be moments when he will act like a great human being. And that's going to happen to all of us. The question is, which of the parts dominates most of the time? If we could be dominated all the time by the divine part, then in that case, we would be gods. So we are not gods. If we were dominated all the time by the vegetable part, we would be vegetables. All the time by the animal part, we would be animals. The human being is precisely this oscillation, this change, this something that is shifting within man. It is precisely what characterizes the human being. The man who is moved by his best part, most of the time, is the so-called aristocrat. Ariscos. So, with probably when you studied in high school, this term aristocrat was put as someone, it was a rich and socially dominant elite, right? That was the distortion that the term had over time. An aristocrat is someone who is governed by his best part, by his best portion. That is, by the human part and by the divine part, the largest portion of time in his life. So the first point is it has to be clear to understand philosophy, to understand Greek mythology. The human being is ruled by multiple parts, and who is the ruler of your internal kingdom? If you are governed by your best part, you are an aristocrat. If you are ruled and controlled by your worst part, you are a tyrant in almost every sense of the word. That's why when you read the myths, it will say, so and so, the prudent one. And then there will be a myth where he acts like the most imprudent person on the face of the earth. Then we read it like that. And a large part of the questions about mythology that people ask me, at least, is like this. But how is so and so the prudent one? And here he is acting with the greatest imprudence in the world at this moment here. So and so, the wise. What's his name? The wise. So he's the wise one, but at a certain point, he's acting like the most foolish person in the world because human beings are just not constant. In that moment there, the wise man isn't being wise because he's being governed by his worst part, and the prudent man isn't being prudent because he's being governed by his worst part. Why am I starting with this here? The whole Odyssey, the entire epic narrative of the Odyssey, is so that Odysseus can finally return to being governed by his best part, by his Aristos, and by his sense of Arete. As long as he isn't governed by his best part, he can't go back to being the ruler of Ithaca. Only a man who is governed by his best part can govern a state well, govern a kingdom well. How do you know that, Paula? The turning point of the work, unfortunately, this point doesn't appear in Nolan's work. There's another very cool movie of the Odyssey, which is the movie from '97, which is with Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee plays Tiresias, who is the seer. Not even Christopher Lee's movie, which is also very good, shows this turn. Odysseus's last stop before managing to reach Ithaca is an island called the Island of the Phaeacians. The Island of the Phaeacians. And I said here that Odysseus would only be able to return to Ithaca and govern Ithaca when he regained his Aristos, when he became the best version of himself. And the Greeks called the best, they're two words with the same etymological origin, Aristos, which is the best part, and Arete. Arete is the best version of yourself. A human being can only be happy. This right here, if we were taking a test, I'd say, guys, this is going to be on the test. Write it down. For Greek philosophy, for Plato, for Aristotle, a human being can only be happy when they seek arete. What is the arete of a human being? It's the search for your best part, for your best version. So if we were an eye, our arete would be to see well, to see better and better. If we were a knife, our arete would be to cut well and to cut better and better. A human being can only be happy when they live at their highest level and seek to be themselves better and better, better and better, better and better. This is the search for arete. This is the search that is proposed, the ideal of life proposed by Greek philosophy, by Greek education, by Greek paideia. And it's as if Ulysses, back in Odysseus, Ulysses is the Latin name, right? Odysseus back in Troy had lost that, and now he's going to have to regain it. On the island of the Phaeacians, the name of the queen of the island of the Phaeacians is none other than Arete. Arete is sitting there quietly by the warm fire, and you have earth, water, air, and fire sewing a beautiful violet cloak, which is known to be the highest color of the rainbow. Then Odysseus humbly kneels down low at her feet, tightly and desperately embraces her legs, and sincerely and earnestly begs her to help him return to his beloved home of Ithaca. And then afterwards, he goes to sit in a corner full of ashes as if it were the remains of a bonfire. So you have Arete as elevated fire and him sitting there in the corner in the ashes of the bonfire. This is one of the most beautiful scenes of Odysseus of the Odyssey, which unfortunately doesn't appear in either of the two works. Then after that, then he con it froze. It froze. And there we're back. Are we back? I think we're back. So we're back. Sorry, everyone. The internet got a little unstable here. So the Odyssey is precisely him trying to return to the best version of himself, trying to be the most elevated he can be again. The live stream will be recorded. Later, you can skip this little part that we cut out. By the way, down here in the video description, we have our streaming platform, our Netflix of philosophy, which is Acropolis Play, and we have a course with 12 classes just explaining the symbolism of the Odyssey in depth. You're going to become experts on the Odyssey, experts on this work. I highly recommend it. The monthly fee is the price of a snack. Classes with Professor Lucia, classes with the great teachers we have at New Acropolis. I guarantee you're going to like it a lot. Yeah, so when he achieves this condition, his RA, then he can return to Ithaca because only a man who is governed by his best, by his most elevated part is the one who can govern externally. Now we're going to talk a bit about what's in the work, what's in the book that isn't in the movie, and vice versa. What were the adaptations that Nolan had to make? First, just a general overview of the work. The work is composed of 24 books, and it talks about the 10 years of return, 10 years that Odysseus took to return, to manage to return to Ithaca. Actually, of those 10 years, 1 year he spent on the island of Circe, and 7 years he spent on the island of Calypso. So it was 8 years that he spent just on those two islands, just in those two lands. Essentially, all of the other various adventures happened in the last 2 years. The actual story itself takes place, the book begins in the last 50 days, give or take a few days, 49, 40 something, 60 last days of that entire 10-year period. So the work begins there at 9 years and 10 months. Then he goes, leaves Calypso's island, gets lost at sea, spends 20 days at sea, arrives at the island of the Phaeacians, sorry, and there he tells what everything that happened before. He tells Queen Arete, he tells the princess Nausicaa, he tells the king what happened in flashback. So the book happens in flashback. Then, in since it's very hard to understand this, both in the 97 work with Christian Felipe and in the movie now from 26, they do it in direct order instead. They don't tell the book in reverse order, practically. Now, Nolan, he almost told it a bit in reverse order, right? But the 97 movie is in direct order, almost completely. Of the 24 works of the 24 books of the of the Odyssey, the first four are called the Telemachy because how does the book start and how does the movie start? How Penelope lived and how Telemachus lived with Odysseus away, with Odysseus far off in distant lands. So they were there in the kingdom. They were in the grand castle. And the royal castle was occupied by 108 greedy suitors. 108 suitors who wanted Penelope's hand, wanted to become the kings of Troy. And understand that Penelope had been waiting for 20 years for Odysseus. The first 10 years, it was sort of her duty to wait because he was in Troy and everyone knew he was in Troy. Over the course of the next 10 years, especially after all the warriors had finally returned back from Troy to their homes, and Odysseus didn't, and absolutely no one had any news at all of Odysseus. So Odysseus was well known. If he were in some civilized land, if he were alive, she would receive news of him. Yeah, it's as if it wouldn't be absurd if she had married another companion. And her parents, her father, encouraged her to marry again. Her own son at one point encourages her to marry again. Except she didn't want to marry. She is the model of the faithful wife. Faithful even when it would be acceptable for her not to be faithful. She continues being faithful to her husband, Odysseus. And then Telemachus, then this concept of adolescence, it is a modern concept. In ancient in antiquity, you were a child or you were a man. There wasn't this transition of adolescence. And so Telemachus was a child who couldn't fight against the suitors. And so this is a part that the work leaves out. Athena, the wise goddess Athena, strongly encourages young Telemachus to begin his travel. First, he will travel to the ancient city of Pylos to meet a noble king named Nestor, and then he will travel onward to the famous city of Sparta. We're frozen again. First, Pylos. Go back. So the goddess Athena will encourage young Telemachus to embark on a journey, traveling first to Pylos to meet the wise Nestor, and then continuing on to Sparta to talk with the legendary king Menelaus. And then at the end of the book, now this isn't in the movie, at the end of the book, when Odysseus is already in Ithaca, Odysseus is in Ithaca, Telemachus is in Sparta, and Odysseus and Athena are talking. And then Athena says, "Look, you stay here hidden for now. I'm going to disguise you as a beggar so that no one recognizes you, and I'm going over to Sparta. I'll bring Telemachus back. I'll encourage Telemachus to return, and I'll warn him that there's a caravan, that there's a boat of suitors who are waiting for him to kill him. I'll tell him which path he has to take so that he isn't killed. And I sent him there to seek news of you." And then Odysseus looks at Athena and asks, "But why did you send him there to seek news of me if you knew where I was? Couldn't you just tell her?" Then she explains, "I sent him there so that he would earn his name, so that he would become a man." In other words, the learning of the road, the learning of the journey, is what Athena We'e wanted Telemachus to have. So the first 4 books out of 24 are called the Telemachy. When she makes contact with Nestor, when Telemachus makes contact with Nestor, it's as if it were a model. Think that Telemachus is someone who was born without a father figure, without a prince figure, without a model of order, without a king figure. So he had no way of knowing the correct way to be a king and to fight for his home. When he reaches Nestor, he meets the model of a king, the model of order, the model of a prince, how he should behave, how he should act. This is the importance of the Telemachy, and that's what Telemachy means. And then he gets there, meets Nestor in Pylos. Nestor doesn't appear in Nolan's work. I could be wrong, but I'm almost certain he doesn't appear. Then later he goes to Sparta, and we're going to talk a bit about Sparta, which had some distortions there. One thing that's always mentioned in the movie is this so-called law of Zeus. Law of Zeus. They obey the laws of Zeus. He doesn't obey the law of Zeus. This is against the law of Zeus. What is this law of Zeus? The law of Zeus is the law of hospitality. Hospitality was a fundamental and sacred pillar within ancient Greek culture. So, if a beggar or a weary stranger arrived at your house, humbly seeking shelter, a warm plate of food, or some clothes, it was your duty to provide it without question. You gave food, you gave clothes, you gave a bath, and then after you gave all that, you'd ask, "What was your name again? Where'd you come from? Who is your father? Who is your mother?" You don't ask beforehand to see if you're going to give. The law of hospitality, when you read the work, you'll see this law of hospitality, xenia or xenia, Xenia in Portuguese, expressed many times, being said many times. The law of hospitality and the Cyclops, for example, they don't have the law of hospitality. The Laestrygonians don't have the law of hospitality, which is why Penelope can't just kick out the suitors, the 108 suitors from her house. Both because Telemachus lacks the strength, lacks the male figure to kick them out, and because it would be against the law of Zeus. Under the law of Zeus, you can't just kick out a guest, someone who asks you for shelter. It's a complicated thing. So, this is the so called law of Zeus. You can't respect disrespect your guests. It's a very significant value, this matter of visiting, and it creates lifelong bonds. And just as a small side note, so you truly understand the full gravity of Paris's crime in stealing Helen or running away with Helen, depending on the specific version of the story you read, while he was visiting Menelaus's house. He was disrespecting a law of Zeus. And those who disrespect the laws in general are severely punished. And it's one of the consequences of Paris's punishment of the fact that Troy fell. One other causes. Another element that appears quite a bit in the work is the little dog Argos. Yes, it's in the work, and yes, it's in the book, except in the book, he only appears at the end of the work, and in the movie, he appears from the very beginning of the work. To study mythology, two important keys for you to start understanding any myth is first, a character's name appears. Look for the etymology of that name. The etymology. So, Odysseus, what is the etymology? Argus, what is the etymology? Telemachus, what is the etymology? Second, look for who that person's parents are. So that person's name says a lot about them, says a lot about what they represent, the psychological pattern, the behavioral pattern, the way of acting that they represent. Agamemnon means obstinacy, and you'll see in the work that he is obstinate. Odysseus means the one who is hated, and he is hated precisely for his intelligence. And Argos means brightness, splendor. So what happens? Argos was Odysseus's hunting dog, and what the work says and the movie represents from the start is that from the moment Odysseus left, Argos wasted away, wasted away, wasted away, wasted away until when he was very weak, the suitors put him to live on top of the manure. So what does that mean? That the brightness of Ithaca wasted away without the king, without Odysseus, until it was in the manure. It was at the bottom. And a scene that's true to the book and true to the movie is that Argus is there, almost dead, and even with Odysseus being transformed, transmuted into a beggar by the goddess Athena, no one was able to recognize him. But the little dog Argus went there and recognized Odysseus. He managed to recognize him, wagged his little tail, and then died. So it's one of the most beautiful and saddest scenes in the book, and it appears in the movie. In fact, that scene is there in the movie. Another very strong thing in the movie is the idea of Odysseus's bow. It's not the first myth where the hero has a bow that only he is able to bend, and where the hero has an aim that only he is capable of having. There's another myth that we study in our philosophy course, which is the Ramayana, where Rama, he has a bow that only he is able to bend. Even it's so strong, the others weren't able to bend it. He not only bends it, but breaks the bow. And the unique aim, another Indian work, which is the Bhagavad Gita, the hero of this work, Arjuna, his great characteristic is being able to bend any bow and have an aim without equal. What does the bow mean? The bow represents the bending the bow means the mastery of oneself. Remember those four parts: vegetable, animal, human, and divine? It's as if the vegetable and animal part, vegetative and concupiscent, had been mastered by the human aspect and by the divine aspect. So he bends it, he masters it, and the righteousness is the shooting of the arrow through 12 holes, which is the test that the suitors would have to pass to become the king of Ithaca. That perfect aim, that perfect righteousness, that self mastery that Odysseus had to conquer. Because whoever has tried to shoot a bow, I've never tried, but I'm sure of it. You have to have a precise control there of your hand, right? Some people who compete even take beta blockers, which is a medication that helps you shake less. It's self mastery, this mastery of oneself. So, this mastery that Odysseus has, Another symbol, just a curiosity for you to know, of a person who has self mastery is someone who domesticates either wild horses or who domesticates birds, domesticates hawks, domesticates falcons, domesticates eagles. Because if you are able to domesticate a wild animal, you are able to domesticate your own inner wild animal. So you have Hector of Troy, who is famously known as the noble horse tamer or the horse breaker, sorry, because he is truly the virtuous man who completely masters himself. If a man who is able to master a wild animal, domesticate it, is able to tame himself, his own personality. So Odysseus's bow represents that, and that's the final test, in fact, of the Odyssey. And what appears there in the work is exactly in the movie. It's what's in the work. It's what's in the book. A very cool part of the Odyssey, which is in the book, and the 1997 movie doesn't even mention it, but it's very beautiful and very symbolic, is the wound on Odysseus's thigh. So the wound, which is the wound by which the servant who raised Odysseus recognizes him, Penelope recognizes him, not just for that, also for something else. His father recognizes him at the end of the work, in the last book of the work, this wound on the thigh. So remember, I mentioned to you that for you to understand a character in Greek mythology, in any mythology, okay, what is that character going to represent? First, look for the etymology of his name. Second, look for who his parents are, because in myths, it's as if the child were the arithmetic mean of the parents. There's a very beautiful myth that we also study in our course, which is the myth of King Arthur. King Arthur, he is the son of a warrior, a very powerful but selfish and impulsive king named Uther. And Uther marries the queen, or lies, actually, in this case, lies with the extremely pure queen who is called Igraine. And from the union of Uther, who is an impure king, with Igraine, who is a pure queen, Arthur emerges, who is a pure king. And in Odysseus's case, on one side, Odysseus's grandfather was the greatest thief in Greece. Odysseus's grandfather wasn't just a clever thief. He was the greatest thief in Greece. And his name, Autolycus, means exactly clever as a wolf, sagacious as a wolf. So he is intelligence, but directed towards evil. So on one side, Odysseus's ancestry is this intelligence directed towards evil. On the other side, that's the maternal side. The paternal side is from Laertes, who is extremely noble. Then you unite the impure intelligence with the pure nobility, then someone emerges who has an intelligence that can be pure, which is Odysseus's intelligence. Except that Odysseus, he oscillates. It's as if he had within himself this nature of this thief's intelligence. It is almost as if he had a mark, as if his entire personality were distinctly marked. And the whole Odyssey is designed so that he eventually stops being this clever guy in the craftiest sense of the word and becomes truly wise in the very highest and most profound sense of the word. Intelligence can turn into craftiness, intelligence can turn into wisdom, depending on whether you use it for good or for evil. The gift of oratory can turn into manipulation. The gift of oratory can come to turn into pedagogy if you use it for good or for evil. So the mark on his thigh is as if he had precisely this tendency of the personality of this scar, this mark. And he earns this mark precisely by going on a hunt with his grandfather and his uncles, who are his grandfather's sons. There are other symbolisms too. He does this on Mount Parnassus, which also has another meaning. Mount Parnassus was the mountain of the Oracle of Delphi. It was an initiatory center, but I won't have time to go into this second symbolism. If you join the philosophy course, then we can talk more about that. Maybe we'll be talking about that too over at Acropole Play in our course. So this thigh mark, its origin is from there. It's a very beautiful part of the myth, which doesn't appear in the 97 movie and appears here in Nolan's movie. Another interesting thing is the swineherd Eumaeus. When Odysseus returns to Ithaca, what Odysseus had to conquer in those 10 years was humility and self-control. Humility and self-control. Intelligence without humility, intelligence without self-control destroys the intelligent person. An intelligent person without humility thinks they know everything more than anyone else. So no matter how smart you are, you don't know everything, not in your field, and even less in other fields you're not capable in. So intelligence without humility breeds arrogance, and then that'll trap you instead of setting you free. And intelligence without self-control breeds impulsivity, and that intelligence will put you in a labyrinth. Yeah, and he had to conquer those 2 things. And in the final books of the epic in Ithaca, after he finally returns to Ithaca, it's constantly a matter of him being provoked and controlling himself. Provoked and controlling himself. And being provoked and controlling himself. And the interesting thing is that Athena deliberately incited the 108 suitors to provoke him even further. This is very similar to the famous biblical account of Moses and the powerful Pharaoh of Egypt. You see, whenever a plague was sent, God would intentionally harden the Pharaoh's heart so that he would stubbornly refuse to give in to the demands. The same thing. So Athena incited the 108 suitors to provoke Odysseus more. For what? So that he would develop self control or show the self control he gained in those 10 years. Intelligence without self-control, without humility, destroys the person. It stops from no, it's not wisdom. So he had to develop that. And when he returns to Ithaca, the only allies he has are his son Telemachus, a swineherd who is Eumaeus, a cowherd, and the servant who recognizes the scar on his thigh. And the gods, right? He has Athena by his side and Zeus by his side. And then it shows the humility he has. He has to start from the bottom again, the humility he had to conquer. He had to go down to the ashes. He had to go down to the underworld. Except the movie portrays Eumaeus as if he were blind. He's not blind. If he's blind, it went very unnoticed by me in the work, in the book. But I don't remember any reference to a blind Eumaeus in the book. And Eumaeus, he appears in the movie teaching Telemachus how to fight. And Eumaeus doesn't teach Telemachus how to fight in the book. Yeah, they had a great relationship, a great affection between them, Eumaeus and Telemachus, so much so that Telemachus calls Eumaeus daddy, but it's not Eumaeus who teaches him how to fight. That appears there in the movie, but it doesn't appear in the book. Yeah, when Telemachus is in Sparta, it's his second visit. His first visit, which is in Pylos, doesn't appear in Nolan's movie. The second visit, which is to to meet Agamemnon and to meet Agamemnon, however you prefer to pronounce it. Okay. Agamemnon meeting Helen, whom he didn't know yet, happens in the book, happens in the movie. And in the movie, the one who recognizes you are the son of Odysseus is Helen. And in the book, too, the one who recognizes that Telemachus is the son of Odysseus is Helen. Because remember, the rule is if a stranger arrives at your house, you welcome him, give him food, clothes, a bath, then afterwards you ask who he is. That is the law of Zeus. And then he's there talking to Agamemnon. Agamemnon hadn't even asked yet who he is. And then Helen looks at him and says, "You are Telemachus, son of Odysseus. The resemblance to your father is striking." Then Agamemnon says, "It's true. You are just like your father." This scene really happens in the movie and in the book. One specific scene that happens in the movie but doesn't happen in the book is that Helen in the film version has a noticeably deformed face, almost as if Agamemnon had violently cut her face as a severe physical penalty for her betrayal. This doesn't happen in the book. Quite to the contrary, Agamemnon is a deeply passionate and devoted husband, and then you'll be able to draw your very own conclusions. And it's not in this work that this scene I'm going to tell happens. It's in a work called the Trojan Women. That after that Troy is invaded, Agamemnon enters Troy, and then he has a sword and is going to kill Helen. When he's gonna kill Helen, Helen takes off her clothes and opens her arms for him to kill her. Then he can't kill Helen because she is so beautiful. And then Helen is gonna tell her version. Her version is that she didn't run away with Paris, that in fact, she was kidnapped by Paris, and that the kidnapping only happened because she had been bewitched by the goddess Aphrodite. So she was a victim of the goddess Aphrodite. That's the only explanation for me having this now that I'm talking about is from the Odyssey, for me having abandoned such a virtuous husband and having abandoned my young daughter. This now that I'm talking about is from the Odyssey, not from the Trojan women. Only this scene of taking off the clothes is from the Trojan women. But she says she was bewitched by Aphrodite. That's why she let herself be kidnapped. But it wasn't an escape on her part. And then she starts to tell how at a certain moment before Troy fell, Odysseus manages to enter Troy dressed as a beggar, and no one recognizes him. The only person who recognizes him is Helen. Then Helen, as is proper of the law of Zeus, graciously welcomes Odysseus into her private room, provides him with fresh clothes, a warm bath, and food, and solemnly promises that she won't snitch on him to the Trojans. She'll only reveal his true identity after he's safely outside the gates of Troy. Because if she snitched, you just can't do that to your guest, as it would be a direct violation of the sacred law of Zeus. And then she telephoned, this is Helen telling. And then there's a funny scene from the movie and the book, funny in a way, curious, that when the massive Trojan horse is finally inside the city of Troy, Helen starts pretending to be the that she's the wives of the Greek warriors. She is pretending to be the wife of the Greek warriors. And she actually fakes the distinct voices of the warriors' wives one by one, calling out to them from the shadows to see if they will respond so that the warriors respond and give themselves away, those who are inside the horse. In other words, she tries to undermine the Trojan horse stratagem. And then Agamemnon says, no, but it's because you were bewitched by a demon. That's why you did that. You in your right mind wouldn't have done such a thing. This term demon, which is how it's translated there, but it's actually daemon. Daemon, it doesn't have the negative connotation that demon has in Portuguese. Daemon is a spirit. It can be beneficial or it can be malevolent. In the case of this one, that's would be bewitching Helen. It would be a demon in the actual negative sense of the term, or at least a trickster. But then the husband says, no, actually, she ran away because she was bewitched and tried to undermine the stratagem because she was bewitched. Anyway, everyone can draw their own conclusions about the romance of Menelaus and Helen. But the scarred face of Helen, this punishment of Helen, isn't in the book. Okay, that is in the feature movie, but it is actually not found anywhere in the original book. And the other scene too is that when Telemachus is leaving, Helen in the book, in the movie, right? In the movie, Helen comes and pulls Telemachus and says, "Apologize to your mother for what I did and for all the harm I committed and brought to her." That's not in the book. No. Helen didn't do anything in the book out of malice. Everything she did was because of a spell from the gods. So she's a victim of everything. She doesn't apologize for having run away slash been kidnapped by Paris. She doesn't apologize for that. No, this scene that's in the movie isn't in the book. Next, Calypso's island appears, and then Nolan he expertly blends together two distinct and separate trials. The first of these is the trial of the Lotus-Eaters, which represents the second major stop in the epic journey of the Odyssey from the classic book, The Odyssey. The very first stop on their long journey home is the rugged island of the Cicenones, where Odysseus and his brave men decide to launch a fierce raid, and he completely sacks the entire island of the Cicenones. Because it's the first thing he does after leaving Troy is sack the island of the Cicones. Yeah, showing that he was the clever intelligence. And at the end of the book, he'll be the wise intelligence. So the whole Odyssey is the purification of Odysseus so that he stops being a cunning intelligence and becomes a wise intelligence, fitting for a sage, which is Odysseus. It's the purification. He'll reach his Arete, his Aristos, his very best. Then the second scene is the island of the Lotus. Yeah, which from the movie, the book, the island of the Lotus, where when he stops somewhere, he wouldn't go down with his whole crew. He'd send some heralds who were people who check out the island, three or four people. So if they were attacked and died, only three or four died, not the whole crew. And then those sailors who went in started eating lotus. The lotus is a plant that makes you forget who you are, forget all your pain, forget your origin, and live anesthetized. A drug, a plant-based drug. Yeah, in the movie, Nolan makes it as if first the lotus is on Calypso's island, and the lotus isn't on Calypso's island. On Calypso's island, he's completely conscious. We'll talk about what happens on Calypso's island. And Odysseus doesn't eat lotus in the book. The ones who eat the lotus are his sailors. On the contrary, the sailors start eating the lotus. They don't want to leave the island of the Lotus-Eaters, who are the Lotus-Eaters. And Odysseus goes and takes them by force and brings them by force to the ship. So he doesn't eat lotus in the book, okay? Nolan tried to combine these two things, these two islands, but it doesn't happen. Odysseus doesn't eat the lotus in the book. Yeah, let me see here if I should talk about Calypso now. And Calypso's island, which appears from the very beginning, Calypso's island is actually the last stop. It's the final island before the island of the Phaeacians, which is the specific island where he can finally return home to Ithaca. On Calypso's secluded island, he spent 7 long years. Calypso is a goddess. Yeah, and he marries the goddess. And she gives him a sense of absolute and complete stability, like a life entirely without problems, an existence that is truly eternal, a state of pure eternity, and not just eternity, but a vibrant and youthful eternity. And then Odysseus, despite all of this, spent the long nights with Calypso and the weary days crying, deeply unhappy because he was trapped on Calypso's remote island. That is exactly how the story is told in the book. That is how it is written in the original text. It was nights in Calypso's bed and days crying because he wasn't in Ithaca. He spent 7 years like that, 7 years crying on the shore because he wasn't in Ithaca. What does that mean? You have to stay true to who you really are, continuously striving to improve yourself every single day. That is exactly what will make a person become truly happy and deeply fulfilled in life. Even if between marrying the goddess, being eternally young, having an eternal life of pleasures and not dying and having no problems, between that perfect life and your arate, being yourself better and better, what will make you happy is seeking your arate, doing what you have to do, being who you should be, and reaching the highest version of yourself. So it won't come to us because we think that what takes us away from life, what takes us away from our focus, from our goals, are the bad things. Yeah, there are two distinct and different types of procrastination. There's that procrastination where you completely waste your valuable time doing junk, endlessly scrolling through Instagram, on YouTube, watching silly shows, things that don't build you up. But there's that other procrastination where you stop. You do perfectly good things, interesting things, noble things, but they simply aren't the specific things you should be doing right now. So it's a different, more deceptive form of procrastination, more subtle, because you're actually doing good and noble things. You're not wasting your time with meaningless junk, but it's not what you should be doing. And we can only be or become what we should be if you're winning the sacrifice and let go of perfectly good and interesting opportunities to do what you have to do, what is truly and uniquely meant for you. So Calypso perfectly embodies this idea. The sacrifice of what you should be doing to do something that is occasionally even more appealing than what you were going to do, but it's not what you should be doing. It's not your duty. It is not the specific role you were meant to play. So you won't be able to be happy like that, just as Odysseus wasn't happy. Calypso represents this, the escape from your duty to do something better. Or in our case, we won't have something at that level, but to do something noble, something good, but it's not what you should be doing. Yeah, and then after he wasn't a prisoner there in Calypso so much that when and not Circe either, okay? He spends 1 year with Circe, spends 7 years with Calypso, and he just goes and says, "I want to leave." They say, "Okay, there's wood over there, there's wood over there, you can go." They don't hold him back. The moment he decides to leave, he leaves. There's no real obstacle for him to leave. The moment he decides internally to leave, he simply leaves. Yeah, he wasn't their prisoner. He was a prisoner of himself on Calypso's island. Then, after those 7 years, he decides and he finally leaves Calypso's island. After that island of Calypso, Polyphemus's cave appears in the movie. Now, this scene is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. One of the most beautiful and most striking scenes. So, again, etymology. Polyphemus was he was the son of Poseidon. Yeah, Ulysses knew that he was the son of Poseidon. In the movie, it shows as if he didn't know he was Poseidon's son, but he knew. And Polyphemus means etymologically very famous or much talked about or someone very well known. He arrives at the island of the Cyclopus. Polyphemus is a Cyclops, but he didn't know it was the island of the Cyclopus. Then he arrives at a cave, and the cave is full of wine and it's full of cheese. By the law of Zeus, by the law of Zeus, by Xenia, they could eat. And it was the obligation of the host, the obligation of the homeowner to give food. And they had been sailing for a long time at sea and were dying of hunger and thirst. And he goes and eats cheese there and drinks the wine, and he also takes wine to give as a gift to Polyphemus, a very strong wine. And then Polyphemus enters the cave and closes the cave with the stone, right? Yeah, the Cyclops only has one eye. In the movie, no dialogue happens at this moment between Odysseus and Polyphemus, but in the book, dialogue does happen. Then Polyphemus looks at those men eating his cheese and thinks, "Who are you?" And he introduces himself. He doesn't say his name, right? "We are valiant warriors coming from Troy. We are making our way back to our home. And by the law of Zeus, we ask for your kindness and hospitality." Then he says, "Law of Zeus? Nobody obeys the law of Zeus here. No." The Cyclops represents mythology, usually the chaotic forces. And the law of Zeus and the gods or civilization represents the cosmos. So you have chaos and the cosmos. Chaos doesn't have laws, and the cosmos has laws. He says, "No, we don't obey the law of Zeus here." Then he goes and eats two warriors. He eats two warriors and then goes to sleep. He said, "I'll eat two here, and tomorrow I'll eat more." Then he goes to sleep. And then when he sleeps, the men prepare a piece of wood, a log of wood to, no, takes a sword to kill Polyphemus. Then Odysseus says, "But if we kill him, who's going to open the cave? We'll die in here." And then early the next day, the massive Cyclops wakes up, still not knowing Odysseus's real name yet. The Cyclops wakes up and immediately eats two more men. And then Odysseus cleverly tricks him, saying, "Here, please have some of this truly wonderful wine." It was an extremely strong wine. The Greeks, they drink diluted wine because the wine was very strong. This wine was so strong that one cup was enough for 10 cups. And the Cyclops drinks the wine straight, right? And then he starts getting drunk. Then, wow, what a wonderful wine. Tell me, what is your name? So that I can give you a gift as a thank you for this wonderful wine you're giving us. This doesn't appear in the movie, okay? And then Odysseus says, "My name's Nobody." Then Nobody, a very beautiful name. Thank you very much for the gift. In return, you will be the last of the sailors to be eaten. And then he's drunk. The Cyclops is completely drunk. And the sailors take a massive wooden log and drive it into the Cyclops' single eye. And then the Cyclops goes, opens the cave with the stone and says, "Brothers, brothers, help me. Nobody has wounded me. Nobody has hurt me. Nobody has deceived me." Then the brothers, "Oh, well, if nobody hurt you, nobody wounded you, then everything's great. Wonderful." And then he have rams there. They put themselves under the rams. They stay under the rams, and the ram goes out because the Cyclops, he's feeling around, searching, trying to catch any man trying to leave the cave. Since they're under the rams, he only feels the ram's wool, and they manage to escape. If Odysseus had just gone away, if Odysseus had departed from the island in a quiet and peaceful manner, if he had spent 3 full days among the people of Minos, who are renowned throughout the land for their silent and reserved nature, right, eating their meals quietly, he would have surely returned to his home in Ithaca much more quickly. But when he is finally sailing away safely on his ship, he cannot help himself and shouts out, "Polyphemus, you absolute fool!" Uh-uh. The one who wounded you was Odysseus. It wasn't Nobody. So you had a dispute, which was the very famous against the average Joe. If the average Joe had won, gone away quietly, he would have kept the victory forever. But imagine yourself. You're going to play a soccer match. Spain just won the World Cup. You against your mom. You win the soccer game against your mom. Option A, are you not going to tell anyone, or are you going to want to tell everyone? Because if those people don't know, that victory won't be any fun. This is our pride. This is our vanity. We should be satisfied with the victory itself and not want other people to know about it. Then he says, "It was Odysseus who killed you. It was Odysseus who blinded you." If anyone asks why you have a gouged out eye, tell everyone it was Odysseus of Ithaca who gouged out your eye. Then comes the curse on Odysseus because of his pride and his vanity. Polyphemus cries out, "My father, avenge me. Never allow it to happen." To Poseidon, right? That this Odysseus returns to his home. Let him wander forever at sea. Or if he ever returns, only after many years, after enduring great suffering, will he finally manage to return home. Avenge me. In other words, exactly what Polyphemus said happened to Odysseus. It was all in the plan of the gods, including Odysseus's return. It wasn't that Odysseus returned to Ithaca because he tricked Poseidon. No, it was all within the plans. It was precisely Polyphemus's curse that came to pass. But this part about Nobody, this dialogue, which is very beautiful, because what traps Odysseus and leaves him lost at sea, which is the symbol of the unconscious, the symbol of the worst part of himself, the part he doesn't master, is precisely his arrogance, his pride, his lack of humility, his lack of self-control. And what he'll need to conquer is that humility, that self-control that the years of sailing will give him. Yeah, then appears the island of the Lastrygonians, which is the Lastrygonians are cousins of the Cyclops. Yeah, it's as if the Cyclops were chaos, individual chaos, the absence of internal laws. The Lastrygonians represent a bit of this idea of massification. When they arrive at the island of the Lastrygonians in the book, they enter the island and there's no conversation at all. The people find them and everyone goes en masse to destroy his ships. Yeah, Odysseus at that moment had 12 ships. The number 12 and the number 9 appear several times in the work. 12, 9, 12, 9, 12, 9. In the beginning, when he's losing crew members, he loses them 6 by 6, which is half of 12, right? The number of suitors in the castle courting Penelope was 108 suitors, which is 9 times 12. Yeah, 12 and 9 always occur. There were 12 ships. He loses 11 ships. Only his ship manages to escape. So he loses 90%, more than 90% of his crew on this island of the Lastrygonians, right? Yeah, and then after that, he goes to Circe's island. Circe's island is an island where he spends a year, 1 year in the book. It's yeah, the name of Circe's island is it's the island of Aea. Yeah, there's an extra e in there, like Aea, Ea. Yeah, but the island of Aea. Again, etymology. Always start with etymology. Aea means earth, earth, and desires are part of the earth. Circe's island is precisely the island of desires, and the name Circe, the etymology, means circle, because desires have a cycle of their own, which is a vicious cycle. Every remedy, every desire, it'll bring pleasure and it'll bring pain. So first you taste the pleasure and then comes the pain. So what do you do to cancel out the pain? Seek pleasure again, but that pleasure will bring more pain. Then you'll seek pleasure again, which will bring more pain. Pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain. You enter the cycle of vices, and that's how vices arise. Vice, a vice is a good thing. It's a pleasurable thing, but it causes pain. Then you use the pleasure of the vice to cancel the pain, and then you enter a vicious cycle. And Circe represents exactly that cycle. Circe's island, he doesn't show that in the movie. In the movie, he portrays Circe as if she were a woman, a witch, an elderly witch. Yeah, in the book, she's a witch. She's an extremely beautiful, irresistible sorceress. And then when the sailors approach, remember that when he stops the ship somewhere, not everyone goes in together, right? Only a few brave sailors decide to go in. When the sailors slowly approach Circe's island, they hear that wonderful, enchanting voice, that delicious smell of food, and see that beautiful woman calling them inside. Then she says, "No, please come in. Come eat. You're all so tired. Come here and rest for a while." Then everyone goes in except one, who is Eurylochus, who also appears a lot in the movie. And then Eurylochus, they all eat. When you when you surrender to Circe's pleasures, Circe's wand was capable of turning men into beasts. It was also capable of turning beasts into men. Yeah, and then they don't all become pigs. You become the animal most similar to your nature. In the movie, everyone turns into a pig. Only Eurylochus escapes. He doesn't eat, doesn't drink, only he escapes. Why? Because pleasures, the desire is animalized. Remember, right? Vegetable, animal, human, and divine. If I live a life of pleasures, of only pleasures, not that life can have pleasures, right? But a life only dedicated to pleasures, only dedicated to impulses, you become animalized. That's why they turn into beasts. So on earth, which is the center of pleasures, if you surrender to pleasures, you turn into a beast and enter the vicious cycle of Circe. Then Eurylochus escapes, mourns Odysseus. This is in the book. There's none of that in the movie. And then the other crew members say, "No, let's get out of here, or else the same thing that happened to them will happen to us." Then Odysseus says, "No, it's my duty to rescue them." Just as he rescued them from the island of the Lotus-Eaters, he'll go in and rescue them from the island of the Laestrygonians, from Circe's island, Lotus-Eaters, and Circe. And then, as he's going to Circe's house, to Circe's castle, Hermes comes to meet him, who is the messenger of the gods. Then there's a plant. Every desire is a lack. Every desire is a lack. Every desire is a lack. We desire because we lack something internally. If you have everything inside, you lack nothing outside. So for you to have no lack, it's having everything inside, which is another beautiful idea from Greek philosophy, the idea of autarky. Whoever has everything inside lacks nothing outside. And then Hermes tells Odysseus what's going to happen and gives him a plant called Moly, 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 which is a plant that has a black root and a white flower. Black and white, black and white. If you have black and white, you have all the colors. And he tells him to eat this root. In other words, he's complete inside. Since he's complete inside, he'll become immune to desire outside. This Mobley plant represents that. If I have everything inside, I become immune to desire. And then when he reaches Circe, she offers him everything. And then he says, I don't want anything. I only want my men. And then she was irresistible, and no man was able to resist her. The moment Odysseus resists her, then she falls in love with Odysseus. And then he says, lie do. She says, lie down with me. He says, no, I'm going to kill you. Then she's like, if you kill me, your men won't be transformed into they won't return to human form. Lie with me and I'll transform them. I promise to transform your men back. So he lies with her. She transforms his men back into human beings. And even so, he still spends a year there. And then he wastes a year on desires and vices until he remembers that he has to leave. After Circe's island, it's the same thing I said about Calypso. He wasn't a prisoner of either of them. The moment he says, I'm leaving, she says, okay, and guides him. Look, there's wood here and so on, and you have to do the following to get back home. You'll have to descend into the underworld to talk to Tiresias. This descent into the underworld is part of the story of almost all heroes, which is you descending to the worst of yourself and transforming that worst of yourself, transforming what you are, which is the transmutation of lead into gold. You descend into the underworld and manage to transmute yourself and transform yourself. This descent into the underworld happens here with Odysseus, it happens with Hercules, it happens with Orpheus, and it happens with many other heroes. Descend into the underworld, spend a few days there in the underworld, then rise from the underworld, which is you descending to the worst of yourself and transforming. So he descends into the underworld, and many interesting things happen in the underworld. I'll talk about two. First, he talks to the seer Tiresias, who in the 97 movie is Christopher Lee. And Tiresias tells him what he has to do to get back home. Actually, he doesn't say anything he has to do. He only says the things he cannot do. The prophet explains to him, to get back home, you'll have to pass through the island of the sun god, and whatever you do not eat the sun god's sacred oxen. He says, that is the way home. Then he explains, you have to restrain, to get back home, you have to restrain your greed and the greed of your men. If you can do that, you'll be able to get back home. If you can't do that, you'll die. Your men will die and you will die. And then he says, oh, that all? So it's not even anything he has to do, it's something he cannot do, which is to refrain, which is to eat the sun god's cows. He says, "Oh, okay then, cool." It's a part that isn't clear in the book. I mean, in the movie. In it isn't clear in the movie. I'm a mess, sir. Yeah, it's not clear in the movie, but in the book, he talks to the souls of several heroes. First, of several women, of several people who were great on Earth and who, there in the underworld, were nobody. He talks to several heroes who did great things and who now, after death, were no longer anyone. When he descends into the underworld, he not only discovers what he needs to do slash not do to get back home, he discovers what things are truly valued in life, what really has value, and what has no value in life. And that's what allows a human being to have a life with a deeper meaning, without wasting time, without wasting energy, because he discovers what's worth it and what is. It's what the Stoics called, if you want to know if something is worth doing or not worth doing, ask death. Ask death if that thing is worth doing or not worth doing. Because imagine, I don't like to think like this. Oh, if you were going to die tomorrow, would you do such a thing? Tomorrow, I think, is too radical because, oh, if you were going to die tomorrow, would you go to work? You wouldn't go to work. You'd go see your family, kiss everyone, pay some bills, explain to people where the life insurance is. Yeah, but think of it like this. Imagine you were going to die in 5 years, 10 years. Would you be doing what you're doing right now? Because it's a time long enough for you to do many things, but short enough for you to see that there's not much time to waste. So, if you, to know if something is worth it or not in life, ask death. This descent of Odysseus into the underworld is him asking death what is truly worth it in life. And then he sees that several things the Greek heroes did weren't worth it. They weren't worth it in life. And then he repositions himself in relation to life. There are some schools of philosophy where it's even common for people to have skulls, to have symbols that remind them of death. For what? So that you value your time, because sometimes we live as if we were never going to die, right? Yeah, and then after Circe's island and the descent into the underworld, where he speaks with Tiresias, he's going to face the Sirens, he'll face Charybdis, and he'll face Scylla. And those who guide him, both Tiresias and Circe, guide him on how to overcome these three trials. The siren song, first of all, the sirens weren't in Greek mythology, half woman, half fish. That's a modern conception. Yeah, the image was actually more of a very delicate bird with an absolutely irresistible song. The siren song is exactly what you want to hear in that moment. So, listening to exactly what you want to hear is very tempting. It is very tempting, and it is incredibly hard to resist. Not falling for the siren song. Yeah, he puts wax in the ears of the sailors so they pass by the island of the sirens and don't fall into temptation. But he ties himself to the mast. He wants to hear the siren song, but ties himself to the mast. What does this tying himself to the mast mean? It's recognizing your own weakness, your own limitation. I can't pass by a McDonald's and not eat. Cross the street and walk on the other side. Why? Because I know I'm not able to resist. So take precautions, tie yourself to the mast. Oh no, my friends are going to meet up. Oh, I'll set it for McDonald's. When I get there, I'll order a salad and a sparkling water. I promise. Then it's very, very presumptuous and very overconfident, right? Yeah, we can't do that. What Odysseus does is exactly the opposite. We need to know our weak points, which we all have. And these weak points, take precautions. Take precautions so that we don't give in to them when we didn't want to. That's the symbolism of Ulysses tied to the mast. Knowing yourself and taking precautions about your weak points, about your weaknesses. Then there's Charybdis and Scylla, which the movie doesn't show this part either. They were two monsters. Charybdis was a monstrous whirlpool, but it was a whirlpool that sometimes was active and sometimes remained completely still. And Scylla was a truly fearsome and terrifying creature with six distinct heads. Charybdis, if he passed through the place of he had to pass over one or over the other, if he passed over Charybdis, two things could happen. Either everyone lives or everyone dies. And if he passed by Scylla, it was certain that six of his men would perish, but the rest of his crew would manage to survive. And then he chooses Scylla. Even the goddess Circe herself gives him this guidance: choose Scylla. Why would he do that? Because you know you'll lose six, but at least the rest will keep surviving, which is exactly the leader's choice, right? A leader, he sometimes can't run the risk of losing everything. Sometimes he has to. There has to be a certain sacrifice. You can't sacrifice a part for the whole. And then he chooses Scylla instead of Charybdis. The movie doesn't show that, right? It shows something else. It doesn't show that choice. Then, after passing Scylla and Charybdis, they pass by the island of the sun god. Then, when they're passing by the island of the sun god, they say, "Let's go straight through." Then the sailors say, "No, we're tired. Let's stop. Let's resupply." Then they say, "Look, here's the thing. Okay, we'll stop and resupply, but Tiresias said that if we eat the sun god's cows, we'll die." Then the sailors, "No, we swear we won't eat the sun god's cows." To Odysseus, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "All right, then, let's stop." But then a problem occurs. They stop, and the wind stops. So when you have a full stomach, you look at a plate of food and say, "Nah, you can't eat this at all." Okay. So when you're not hungry, that doesn't tempt you. But when you're literally starving to death, then things start to get a whole lot more complicated. And then the sailors start talking amongst themselves. Well, between slowly starving to death and being suddenly struck down by a god, we'd much rather be struck down by the god. So let's eat. Who knows? Maybe we can escape. Then, when we finally arrive back home to Ithaca, we'll perform a sacred and solemn sacrifice to the sun god Helios and properly make amends for the loss of his cows that we ate. That's exactly how it is in the book. And it doesn't appear with these details in the movie, right? But that's how it is in the book. So we're going to starve anyway. It's better for us to die struck down by a god. And then they eat. After they eat, the wind returns. Why? Because Odysseus had to lose everything. He had to lose everything. He had to lose all his false identity. He had to lose all his pride, all the ships, all the men to be able to reach the best of himself. Another way to see this crew, it's as if the 12 ships and all the crew members, there were probably 12 per ship, 12 crew members per ship, were parts of Odysseus. Everything was himself, only externalized. So he had to lose everything, all his false identity, all his false securities, so that he becomes his Arete, so that he becomes Aristos, so that he becomes one who has a kingly state of consciousness, and only then can rule Ithaca again. And then they eat. After they eat the cows, the wind returns. They set sail, and then Zeus sends a lightning bolt that kills everyone, destroys Odysseus's ship, and only he, remains. Only he survives. And he goes to end up on Calypso's island. Then after the island, then on Calypso's island, we've already explained what happens. He spends 7 years there. This part isn't in the movie now. He spends 7 years there. Then when he says, I'm leaving, she says, okay, there's the wood, and so on and so forth. Then he spends 20 years on the island at sea. 20 days at sea. 20 days at sea. Then the purification of Odysseus will begin. This is the part, it's a beautiful part, because you'll see that the etymologies of various characters you'll meet here all represent purification. Purification, high nobility. Purification, high nobility. First, when he's at sea, after Calypso's island, he meets a nymph named Leucothea. Leucothea. Leuco, you might remember from biology class, comes from leukocytes, from white, right? White leukocytes. Then Leucothea says that then with the purification process starts right there. Take off the clothes you're wearing right now, throw them far away, take that mast you're holding on to, throw it away as well, and take this white cloth and cover your chest completely with this white cloth. And you will find that this white cloth will take you safely to the island of the Phaeacians. Yeah, and then he does it. I'll summarize, I'll say. He does it. There's some stalling before he does. Then he arrives at the island of the Phaeacians. When he arrives at the island of the Phaeacians, there's a princess named Nausicaa. Nausicaa, her name means to burn the ships. Nausicaa burnen de stets. A person who burns the ships is, I burn all possibilities. I only have one possibility. It's the mind focused on a single objective. It's only there. Oh, and what if it goes wrong? It won't go wrong because I won't allow it to go wrong. He burns all the possibilities. The beauty of comparative study is this. In the classic military treatise known as Sun Tzu's Art of War, Sun Tzu offers a key piece of advice. You should never ever put your enemies against a wall or corner them, as a desperate enemy with no way out will fight with much more intensity. Never leave an enemy army without the possibility of escape, because if there's no possibility of escape, the warriors think like this: I'm already dead. Then an enormous strength arises in them. Always give a gap so they can escape. A gap for cowardice. Because if there's a gap, the only option is to fight or die, then you'll fight with all your strength. But if there's a gap to escape, you say, I'm not going to die here. I'm going to escape and take care of my life. Yeah, burning the ships means having no gaps, only having one possibility. Then Nausicaa, who is a virgin princess, was washing her white clothes. So washing, purification, white clothes, purification, in a source of clean water. so clean that it was able to clean any clothes. So leukothea, purification. Nausicaa, purity. Washing clothes, purity. Source of clear water, capable of cleaning any clothes. Then Odysseus arrives right there in that place. And then he meets Nausicaa. And then Nausicaa guides him that when he arrives at her parents' castle, she's the princess. Don't ask the king to take you back home. Kneel to my mother, who is Arete. Remember, the queen is Arete. Arete, the highest. She's by the fire, earth, water, air, and fire, with the clothes embroidering a violet garment, which is the highest color. And Odysseus kneels at her feet, a symbol of begging. It's when you kneel and hug the legs of the person you're begging. This scene appears several times in the Odyssey, in the book. Then he begs her, help me return to Ithaca. And he goes to sit in the corner of the ashes. Then after that, he manages to return to Ithaca, taken by one of the Phaeacian ships. And then when he gets there and the death of the suitors begins, the suitors start being killed, right? With the help of the swineherd, with the help of Telemachus, with the help of the cowherd, and with the help of Athena, he manages to kill the 108 suitors. After that, many scholars say that the book ends more or less there. Penelope, poor thing, was so deceived that she tests Odysseus before being sure that Odysseus was really Odysseus. She asks some questions only Odysseus would be able to answer. And then, when she finally comes to recognize that Odysseus is truly Odysseus, they lie down together in their bed, and Athena holds back the very dawn of the new day so that they can spend a much longer time in each other's arms together. So most scholars say that the book ends there. But if you actually sit down and read through the book, the story continues after that. So they agree that there are always exceptions to this, right? That this ending, what happens after that, was something that was incorporated into the story at a later point, which is him going to find his father, which is him reconciling, appeasing the relatives of the 108 suitors who are deeply resentful and angry, and returning to rule in Ithaca. But apparently that was put in later. It's not part of Homer's original work. But that's always questioned. It depends on the group you study. So that's it. The main scenes of the movie. Read the work, watch our 12 lesson course on the Odyssey on Acropolis Play. I'm sure you'll like it a lot. And take our philosophy course to learn to think symbolically, to learn to perceive these things, these interpretations for yourselves. The thinking symbolically is something very important so that we can understand life, understand our own mind. And myths are an impressive source of wisdom and learning. I'll see if there's any question here that I can answer. Well, here in my chat, no question appears. Whoever has any doubt, wants to write, can write. I'll answer in writing here in the chat. Thank you all very much for your attention, and bye.